Hello everybody, this is Ray Kruse of the ISU Extension Outreach Office of Dubuque County, and today we are talking about some of the things that we can start doing with our potatoes to helping them along in the garden for this growing season. You can see here some beautiful potatoes that are about 6 to 8 inches tall. Now these potatoes were sown on the 21st of April, and you can see how far they've grown. Now, just to contrast with these potatoes, if you planted your potatoes a little later in the season and they're not quite this big, you can see these is another kind of potato that my wife and I planted for our own use. And we seeded these on the 15th of May, and you can just see that they're starting to peek out of the ground right there. So don't be frustrated if your potatoes aren't this big yet, because that's not a problem. Just give them a little time. They'll be there. Now that they're this tall, what we're going to do is we're going to come through and weed our potatoes. And you might be like, Ray, your garden looks so great. There's no weeds. Well, if you take a closer look, guess what? We have a lot of weeds here. We have water hemp. We have crabgrass. We have a volunteer tomato from last year. We've got plantain, wood sorrel, dandelion, knotweed, shepherd's purse, horseweed. We've even got a volunteer black walnut tree that the squirrel brought in with a walnut that was planted this spring when the tiller came through. So I've got a whole gamut of weeds. All I simply do is use my trusty hoe here and just knock them off at the soil surface. You can see here what that looks like. These have been weeded for about 3 hours now, and there isn't hardly any weeds left. They're all kind of dried up. Now, an exception to that rule is if we have perennial weeds in our garden. My worst offender here is quackgrass. You can see a larger specimen of it here, but here is a little specimen that got through the tiller. It originally started off as a 4-inch section of root, and you know what? That just sent out a whole new shoot, and we have a whole brand new weed. This one here, we can't just knock off at the soil surface where it was peeking out because there's a whole root system beneath that has to be removed. And that's one of the weeds where you have to dig that out no matter what, because if you just scuff it off at the soil surface, it's going to come right back. Another offender of that rule here is the dreaded creeping Charlie. You have to rip that out at the root and remove the root completely, because no matter what, it's not going to go away. It's just going to replant itself down in the ground. So, after we're done weeding our potatoes, some gardeners might say, you know what, that's it. I'm done. For another 2-3 weeks, I'll come back and I'll weed again. But there are some additional things we can do to help improve the quality of our potatoes throughout the season. And that is hilling them. You might be like, why? This seems like a lot of work, right? Well, if we imagine what our potatoes are doing here, they're going to seed or put some potatoes out from the base of the plant here underneath the soil, and it's going to be about right here where that potato is going to be deposited. And sometimes when they emerge so big, what happens is they peek through the soil and they get sunburnt. So by coming along and putting down a layer of soil at the base of the potatoes, that's going to add a little extra layer or blanket there. It's going to keep them from getting sunburned. Now again, this is something that's optional. You don't have to do this, but I prefer to improve my quality of my potatoes. Another thing that you can do in your potato crop is add a layer of mulch. Most optimally, what I like to use is grass clippings that are not treated for weeds, because that can carry what's called pesticides into your garden, and you don't want that. So untreated grass clippings, or what I have here is just some weed-free hay that I was able to get myself. Now, I put this down in a layer of about 2 to 3 inches thick. You can see it's pretty thick on either side of the mound here, and this provides so many benefits. It shades the soil so that the soil doesn't get too hot. You know, like we see here, the sun's just beating on the bare black soil. And it gets awfully hot in June and July. So it keeps that root temperature a lot cooler. It also helps to avoid evaporation from the soil and helps to moderate the soil moisture so that our potatoes have more of a constant supply of moisture throughout the season as they're trying to grow. It also helps to keep those weeds down. And again, this only applies to annual type weeds. If you have problems with the dreaded creeping Charlie like we were talking about over here, or the quackgrass, or dandelions, or things like that, this won't be as effective at controlling weeds. But for the most part, this controls my weeds for the majority of the season, and I barely ever have to come out here to pull out weeds. So with that, you can see some of the things that we can do right now in the garden to help our potatoes along in the growing season. Our next things that we have to worry about are soil moisture, if it gets dry out, insects, and disease. And I'll be sending out a growing update if this becomes a problem in my garden, because we're all growing the same potatoes together. So with that, this is Ray Kruse of the ISU Extension Outreach Office of Dubuque County. Happy growing potatoes, everybody.